Last time we were taking a basic wireframe, so kind of a sketch of how things are going to be laid out on the page, and we created an HTML template for it. And we did it exploring some of the new attributes of CSS, ones that we hadn't gone over yet. So I'm going to take a minute to review those, and then we'll go on and redo this same page. Or first we'll clone it to make our entire site. Then we'll redo the CSS so that by changing just the one file, we can have an entirely different look and layout of it. Again, this is emphasizing the importance of separating the HTML from the CSS. By doing that, we can have the same content. We can display it a lot of different ways. And there's a lot of advantages of that. For one, we can change the look when we want to. Many companies have a seasonal look for their website. You know, like if you imagine a greeting cards company or a gift company, jewelry or something like that, they may look a certain way for Valentine's Day, a certain day for St. Patrick's Day, and so on. And it also becomes important when you talk about mobile websites, where you might want your page to look one way on a desktop browser, a different way on a mobile site. So there's a lot of important reasons to be able to have your site have the same content but have a different look. And the starting point of that is having a good separation between the CSS and the HTML. So this is where we left off last time. Here's our template. And again, not a horrible looking site. Certainly we could take a little more care of it and maybe pick less, what do I want to say, a little more subtle colors if we wanted to, unless we wanted the red, white, and blue. You know, nothing wrong with those. If we look at this, and here is our HTML. Notice how we have things in their own section. So we take advantage of the HTML5 tags, and we have a header section, a nav section, an article, and a footer. And again, those would correspond to what we had drawn in our wireframe. Header, navigation, main content, and footer. We said we wanted this to be centered and have blue behind here and so on. All right. Our CSS then, well, let's look at the CSS. Our CSS, we have more stuff in there than we normally do. And the reason for that is due to browser compatibility issues. We have two things that are there just for browser compatibility issues. We have this little blurb, which is sometimes called the HTML5 shiv, which fixes, let me rephrase that. It partially fixes compatibility issues that exist between HTML5 and earlier versions of Internet Explorer. It doesn't completely. It's not going to make your web page, the browser 100% HTML5 compatible. But it will handle the header tag, the nav tag, the article tag, and the footer tag the way that we want it to. All right? So if you remember before, if we were to take this out, and save it, and we looked at the page, looks a lot different, right? Because without that little snippet of code, old versions of Internet Explorer, that is versions prior to version 9, don't understand those HTML5 tags. So it essentially does nothing with them. If we put that back in, we're back in business. Yes?
Could you save that in your style sheet or no?
No, because this is not CSS code. This is JavaScript code. All right. So we're using a little snippet of JavaScript code that someone else wrote. All right. Notice that's not really a style tag, that's a script tag. So that means that it's a little piece of JavaScript. This we could put in our own style sheet, the Firefox Fix. That's hard to say. The Firefox Fix does essentially the same thing except for earlier versions of Firefox. Now, Firefox caught on to these HTML5 things before Internet Explorer did. But that you could incorporate it in. Yes?
What's the difference, just as a general question, what's the difference between JavaScript and jQuery? Isn't jQuery like shorter code?
jQuery is built on top of JavaScript. So what the makers of jQuery said is, there's some very common things that we want to do in JavaScript, that everyone wants to do in JavaScript. So what we will do is we'll write a language that makes it easier to do those things. So if you look at the base of jQuery, the base of jQuery is JavaScript. It's just like think of it as like an extension. It's built on top of JavaScript to do some things and to make some things easier. It would be like the difference between, I don't know if this might be a bad analogy, but it would be like the difference between doing the math on paper with a pencil or using a calculator. All right, you're still doing the same math. You're still doing addition or multiplication or whatever. So you're still executing JavaScript functions. The thing is are you writing the JavaScript functions on your own? Are you using this tool that makes JavaScript functions a little bit easier to write? So that's the basic idea of jQuery. All right, this Firefox Fix, all it contains is, and you can copy mine if you want to, it just contains a series of, or actually one statement that simply tells earlier versions of Firefox that header, section, footer, aside, nav, main, and article, and figure are all block tags. So just treat them like block tags.
Could you cover that into your regular style sheet, or does it have to?
You could. You could put it in your regular style sheet. I just kind of like to have it in a separate style sheet just because, well, then I don't have to worry about, it's a personal preference. I would prefer to keep it separate just because then I would just know. In other words, if I was doing a website, I would know to always include these two lines, this line and this line. And then my own style sheet I would put in there as well. But yeah, it's just a personal preference. All right, let's look at the style sheet that I wrote for things that are different than stuff we did before, because before we did mainly just colors and stuff. Here we have done a little bit more than that. And with each example that we go over the next few classes, we'll be doing more and more and more with the JavaScript. All right. With the body, we set the background blue, which means that unless we override it, everything's going to be blue. All right. And we set the font family. We set the font family, again, in order to fully describe the font family, you want to specify typically multiple fonts because you don't know if a particular font is installed on a particular machine. For example, Arial. Arial is on Windows machines, but it's oftentimes not on Macintoshes. Helvetica is typically on Macs, but not on Windows machines. And those two fonts look the same. And then finally, you're always going to have sort of a none of the above choice. If none of the other fonts are available, the last one will be used, which is a generic sans serif font. And every machine is going to have a generic sans serif font. So the way this works is the browser simply goes down the list until it finds a font that it has. So if it has Arial, it'll use it. If not, it'll try Helvetica. If it doesn't have that installed, it will use sans serif. All right? So typically, again, you supply more than one font because you can never be 100% sure the particular device that's reading your web page has a font installed. And you always end it with sort of the generic either serif or sans serif. All right? Nav UL, list style type none. What does that do? Gets rid of the bullet points. Display inline block, what does that do? Right. Instead of making it a block tag, normally LIs are block tags, which means that they line up, they stack up one on top of the other. What we're saying is we want to treat it like an inline tag, and then the dash block means, but it's going to have some of the block characteristics as well. All right. We did that so that our links, which are in an unordered list, are oriented horizontally instead of vertically. These are all in LI tags. A margin of 3px does what? Well, it puts 3 pixels between each link. All right. Remember, margin is the space between blocks. If we have a block, we have the width of the block, where we can specify either a certain number of pixels or percentage. The width is the width of the content of the block. The padding is the space between the border and the content. We then have a border around it. And then we have a margin, with the margin being the space between this block and any other block. And remember, all these things we have in all 4 directions: top, right, bottom, left. And we can specify them a number of ways. And I think if we look at this example, we'll see a couple different ways that I've done that. So, margin of 3 pixels, because I've only given one number, that number applies in all 4 directions. So top, right, bottom, and left. I could specify only a left margin, all right? And then that would make, I would get rid of some of this extra space on top of it, because there's also a top margin, all right? This is a case where I could take time and explain this, and I can, it's good for me to lecture and explain stuff. I mean, that's my job, right? I mean, I get paid for it. I should do it, right? But for you to really learn this, you're going to really learn this by taking what I've explained as a starting point, then going and playing around with it. So, for example, what if I were to make this margin 0 pixels, 3 pixels? Pardon me? Oh, okay. What if I were to make this margin 0 pixels, 3 pixels? Well, I'd get rid of the top margin, and I'd still have the side margin, so it's going to make this guy shorter. A little bit, by 6 pixels. All right, not a lot, but might be more dramatic if I, had a bigger number in there. All right, Nav Color, $AAAAA. We know that's a shade of gray because our 3 numbers, red, green, and blue, are equal. So anytime they're equal, it's somewhere between white and black. All zeros would be black. All F's would be white. So A's are on the lighter shade of things because they're closer to F than they are to 0. So it would be sort of a light shade of gray. If we want to make this a dark shade of gray, we could go like 909090. And a little bit darker, not really perceptible. Let's make it a lot darker. 303030. There you go. It's gray, but it almost looks like it's black. All right, but it's really just a very dark shade of gray. Some of these things are harder to show on the screen. They're a little more apparent when you're looking at the monitor. Font size 1.1 M. What does that mean? What does 1.1 M mean? Emphasize. So 1.1 M means 1.1 times as big as normal. So 1 M is normal sized. So 0.9 M would be a little smaller than normal. All right. For example, we could make the footer have a font size of 0.8 M. And if we were to do that, then the print in the font in the footer is a little bit smaller. But 1.1 M is a little bit bigger than normal. All right? Just to make them stand out. Text decoration none does what? Removes the underline. All right? So notice these links. Notice normally that links are blue and are underlined. That's the browser's default. So remember that the way that something looks on your web page is a combination between the default of the browser and CSS code that you put in. So we've gotten rid of that underline. And really, why do we underline links normally? Well, to make it stand out and really to show you, hey, these are links. We've used other methods to make sure the links stand out here, right? They're in a navigation bar. I would think most people visiting this site, seeing this, would understand, even without the underlines, that these are links. All right? So we don't really need to underline them. And it sort of gives a neater look without them being underlined. We certainly could underline if we wanted to, and that wouldn't be bad, but I wanted to demonstrate how you could get rid of the underlines. There are some things called the hover, or the pseudo classes with links. The hover being one of them. And what that means is when you put a link and you hover over it, it's going to change the certain attributes. So in this case, we changed the color of the link to red. All right, header. Background is white, so that overrides the body. Width is 60%. So it's 60% of the available space. The minimum width, however, is 500 pixels. So it will not make this smaller than 500 pixels, no matter how small we make the window. All right. Margin, 15 pixel auto. We've given two numbers here. So the margin for the header is 15 pixels above, automatic to the right, 15 pixels below, automatic to the left. Automatic for margin will center it within its available space. So that's what makes sure that this header is centered. Padding is, I have to scroll over to see that, 5 pixels. So what that does is that puts a little bit of space between the edge of the header and the text. If we had no padding, that text would start like right at that edge. All right. And what else do we have? Oh, border. 15 pixels, red and solid. Now border, again, is one of those sort of shortcut properties where we're actually giving 3 attributes: border-width, border-color, and border-style, all in one. And I could write those out: border-color, border-width, border-style. But the browser's smart enough to know red can only mean the color, right? Red can't be the width of the border. How wide do you want to make the border? Red. That doesn't make sense, right? Likewise, solid isn't the width or the color, it's the style, and 15 pixels. So I could write out all of those individually, or I can simply use this shortcut. All right. The rest of these have just about the same stuff in them, so I won't really cover them. Any questions about this? All right, now here comes the fun part. We have our template down, and we are pretty sure that we like the stuff that's in the HTML. Now we can start cloning it. All right, we can make copies of it. So we can make all of our pages, and all we have to do then is edit this one little area on every page and put the content for that specific page on there. Because we've created a template. It's like if you created a form letter, right? If you created a form letter, the only thing you'd need to do is go in and put, for every person that was getting it, put their name, address, greeting, and so on. So now I can go here and I can clone these. So I can take my template and copy it and paste it. I'm going to turn on the file extensions like I always suggest that we do. And I can make my first copy. I can rename it to index. So that's my home page. I can copy this again and rename that to samples. Oh, I skipped about us. So now I have my actual pages. And I can go into and edit each one of them to put in the stuff that is distinct to that page. So on my index, I can put in and get rid of the Greek text, and I could put the actual text for my home page. Now, I'm not going to actually do that because I'm not really building this site, but this is where you'll go in and put the content for each one of your pages in your project. So I'm just going to put a label saying that it's the home page, just so that we can see that. So save it. A couple more to go. There's a calendar page. Reviews. And what's this one? Samples? Yeah. So now I have my 5 or 6 or however many pages. And if I open this up, all right, again, normally that'd be the rest of the content for the page there, but you put whatever you wanted there in. And as I click around, notice we go from page to page, and notice how the page looks consistent. Why does it look consistent? Well, they're all clones of each other, right? They all started out with the same template, all right? Now, here's where it's important that you got everything right in the HTML template. Because if I forgot something, if I spelled classic rock wrong, or if I wanted to put a phone number in the footer, now I have 6 different pages. I'd have to go back and correct each one of them individually. So the idea is that I would want to make sure that I had the template, the HTML for the template as correct as I could possibly be sure it's correct, because once I start cloning them, now I have cloned my mistakes, all right? And if I have to go back and add something in, I have to go and add it into, or change it or delete it or whatever. I have to go into each individual page and do it. The CSS I'm not terribly concerned about. Why? Because the CSS already is in its own file. So if I decide that, gee, I don't want it to be red, I don't want the border to be red, maybe I want the border to be yellow. All right? All I have to do is go into the CSS, change the border from red to yellow, and every single page gets the benefit of that change. Exciting, huh? And of course, we can make even more drastic changes than that if we want to. All right? All right. Let's go, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to save it. Then I'm going to go and I'm going to make a whole new version of the site. And by new version of the site, I mean I'm not going to touch the HTML at all, but I'm going to change the CSS to give me a much different look. All right? Let's say I want the page to look like this. Header on the top. Navigation like this. Content area like this. And footer like that. All right? And you can't see that. You guys are mean, because you guys let me draw up there without warning me. And I can always tell how mean a class is by how long they let me go without indicating I don't have the right screen on. You guys are pretty mean, but it's like almost right before spring break, so I can understand that. All right, so it's a little different, right? Our page right now is oriented like this. But here's the good news. I shouldn't have to touch the HTML at all. I still have a banner section. I still have a navigation section. I still have a content section. And I still have a footer section. The only thing I want different is I want the way that they're situated differently. I want them positioned differently. So the content doesn't change. So I'm not changing the HTML content. I'm simply changing the way that it looks and the way that it is laid out on the page. And that is a job for CSS. And all my CSS is in one file. So I should only have to change that one file, and I'm good to go. All right? Here's the other thing I want to do, and we'll play around with some other changes as well, is I want to put a nice picture in the background. Maybe a picture of a guitar. So, I don't know, a guitar. You know what a guitar looks like. All right. So let's go and find a picture of a guitar. All right. I am going to go to Google. Then I'm gonna while I'm waiting, I'm gonna go to the cafeteria and get a sandwich and have a rest. There we go. And I'm gonna go to Google Images, and I'm gonna type guitar. Search for images. Nice picture of a guitar. I'm going to go to advanced search. Maybe. Oh, I actually don't have to go to advanced search. It's right here. I'm going to put in here that I want things that I'm allowed to use. I'm allowed to reuse. All right. So in other words, ones that are licensed under Creative Commons. All right, so that I don't get into copyright trouble. All right, and I want the size to be large, right? Because I want this to be the background. I kind of like this one. All right, let's go with this one. This could be such a cool website. I'm going to have to make myself a band just so that we can use this website. All right, so I'm going to go and save this. On the desktop. All right. So I'm going to make a copy of my template. I'm going to call it Cleverly Enough. Well, I'm going to rename this one to Template 1. Then I'm going to copy it and call this one Template 2. And I'm going to put the picture of the guitar in there. All right. So, I should not have to touch the HTML at all, because all I'm doing is changing the way it looks. All right. So let's see if I can achieve that. So I'm going to go in here, and let's see what I want to do for this. I want to change the background image. And I want to make the navigation and content area narrower, and I want them to be side by side, and then I want the footer. So we're going to do this in a couple of steps. All right. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the background to be URL and the name of the image is guitar.jpg. It's not that, but I'm going to rename it to be that, because I don't feel like typing in that whole long thing. So guitar.jpg. All right? Yes?
I have a question. What if we decided to organize it a little better to kind of see actually the image, make an image folder and dump all the image folder.
Okay.
Yeah,
the short, actually use a /. It's not, even if you're on Windows, you don't use a /. It's always a /. We'll cover that maybe next time or probably sometime next week. But essentially, yeah, if it was in a subfolder called images, instead of just having the name of the image, you'd have images / and then the name of the file. That applies whether you're talking about images or pages or whatever. Then you can use a ... to go up a level and all that. But we'll cover that in more detail. Right for now, we're just going to assume everything's all in the same folder. All right. So I'm going to get rid of the border on the header because that's a little cheesy. The nav, instead of a width of 60%, I'm going to make it a width of 20%. And a minimum width of 200 pixels. My article, instead of a minimum width of 60%, or a width of 60%, I'm going to make the width 40%, and I'm going to make the minimum width 300 pixels, let's say. There we go. Actually, we'll go 30% and 300 pixels. So now I save this. And if I look at my template 2, All right. Well, it's not exactly what I want, but it is moving in the right direction. All right. What are some of the things that are wrong with this? The background image repeats. That's true. All right. We want the links to be oriented vertically. This is leftovers from our old one where we wanted the links to be oriented horizontally, right? So we gave it only a certain amount of space, so it wants to put them horizontally, but since there's not enough space to put them in, it sort of wraps them around. So when we make the links be oriented vertically, that'll take care of that problem. The other problem is this guy is underneath it, where we want this guy to be alongside of it. All right? So let's go and let's address these issues one at a time. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the... I want to make the links be stacked vertically instead of horizontally. How?
Change the board.
Thank you. How do I make the links be stacked vertically instead of horizontally?
Block instead of.
Right. And in fact, since that's the default for LI tags, I can just get rid of it. I could say display block, but that's already what LI tags are. So I could just get rid of that. All right. So I save that. And now, okay, our links are stacked vertically the way we want. Now, I'm going to go in with this, and I'm going to, just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to make all these have a fixed width. So I'm going to make the width 300 pixels, 300 pixels. All right. Looks about the same, but it'll make it simpler. Now, if I had to describe to you what I want to change about this, I want to push this over to the side, and I want to push this up and maybe over a little bit. That is known as relative positioning. Relative positioning is where you tell the browser, I know where you want to place this thing. All right? I want you, however, to place it someplace a little bit different. All right? In this case, I want to push this certain number of pixels over to the left. All right? So, what I can do is this. First of all, I say position relative. Whenever we talk about relative, you mean relative to something, right? Relative to this room, where is BU 205? Right above, right? So compared to this room, BU 205 is directly above us. Now, would that be true if we were over in the cafeteria? No. All right? So whenever we talk about relative, we mean in relation to something else. So in this case, if I say the position is relative, I mean in relation to where the browser wants to display this. So I can adjust that position up and down. I just did the exact opposite. Up and down. I'm glad the camera isn't on me. Up and down, right and left. So if I say I want this guy to be left minus 200 pixels, what does that mean? It means I want to shove it over 200 pixels to the left. If I said left plus 200 pixels, it would give me 200 pixels that way. But I want to push it. I want it to be less far away from the left of the screen. So I make the left value a negative number.
How about position absolute? Would that be kind of like similar to relative?
Position absolute is similar in the fact that we specify the position in a number of pixels. The difference is position absolute, you're always taking the position from the top left corner of the screen. So if I said position absolute, in fact, we can play with that. We'll do it both ways. All right. I was going to do this example completely relative, and then my next example is going to be absolute, but I can demonstrate the difference between absolute and relative here. So I go in and I say position relative left negative 200 pixels. What that does is pushes that over 200 pixels to the left. All right? Now, if I said position absolute, I would need to give it a top and a left. So I might say something like left 300 pixels, top 250 pixels. Something like that. And then it would put it, well, I kind of messed up, but it put it a little bit too far down and too far over. So let's change it to be left 200 pixels, top 200 pixels. Almost there. Left 150, top 150. All right. You see, I'm zeroing in on this, and eventually I would get it in the same spot.
How come it overlapped or it overrode the whole entire section?
It overrode it because once you start positioning things absolutely, that takes things out of the browser's flow. So the browser says, if you say position absolute, the browser says, this person's handling the layout of this. I'll let them do it. All right? And then I'll position the other things where there is no position defined. So what I would have to do to finish this, all right, is I'd have to go in and put a position for the content and put a position for the footer. That's one advantage of position relative, is it still keeps it in the flow. All right, you're not breaking the browser's flow. You're telling it, hey, browser, still position these guys. I just want to tweak where you're positioning them. Whereas if you say position absolute, or if you say position float, then you're saying, hey, I'm taking the reins here. I'm positioning these guys. You do whatever you want to with the rest of the guys on this page. All right?
Even if we resize it with the absolute state?
If you resize it, the absolute stays exactly that. And that's another sort of a drawback. All right. So let's go back to the position relative. And where was I? Thank you. Position relative. Left negative 200. All right. So now notice how it moves in place, because we're letting the browser do its thing. We're just tweaking it a little bit. Hey, browser, I love the way you're positioning this stuff, but make this little change. Don't you like how I talk to like computers in the browser and all that? My first computer teacher did that, and I think I got that habit. But now we got to position this guy. Where do we want this guy? I want this guy over maybe 150 or so, or 100, more to the left, and I want it up maybe 100 pixels. I don't know. So I can go and do kind of the same thing on the content area. And I can say position relative left, let's say 100, top minus 100 pixels. All right. Well, I want to go a little bit higher, so minus 150 maybe. All right, close enough. All right. Now the footer, what do I need to do with the footer? I need to bump it up a little bit. So I can just say footer, position relative, top, maybe minus. We'll try the same thing, see if it works out. A little bit too high. Still a little bit high. All right, there we go. So here's the good news, right? As I click around from page to page, I have changed every single one of my pages without touching the HTML. Thank you, of any of them. All right, so I don't have to touch the HTML because the content is the same. The content between this and our previous example is the same. The only thing different was the way that it's laid out. Yes?
How about the image itself?
Oh, yeah. Either we like that and we keep it, or I can say no repeat. And there you go. All right, I'm going to put in one thing that you can do within your CSS code is you can put comments in. And I'm going to put comments about where I got my image from. Comments you can do like that. And I'm going to put that just so I don't have the copyright police on my case. Let's search again.
Yeah, it was Internet Explorer.
I use Internet Explorer to find that. I'll just search again. So I can put that in there just as a comment. So at least we're giving credit somewhere. Probably would be better if I put it in the footer, but I'm being lazy here.
Another question, I kind of left that white space. Even if you probably resize it, it might get rid of the white space. But if you had it full screen,
background size cover.
Yeah, what I would do, oh, you mean this?
yeah, white space.
Yeah, what I would do is I would do this. I just put a black as a background. Let's see. That looks better than that. Number of things that you could do for that, but again, we can play around with some more of these things next time. Again, each example that we go over with this, we're going to learn new ways to position, because up till this point, the way that you position stuff was entirely at the mercy of the browser. So now we're going to take control of that and make sure that we position things the way that we want them to. All right, so that's where we will pick up next time. All right, we'll see you in lab.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
How come on the last one that you moved over, you didn't say right because you're actually going right, but you said left? You typed in left.
Okay, let me see. Like, in other words, for this I said left instead of right. I'm pushing it from the left 100 extra.
Yeah.
So I'm going, yeah. In other words,
Instead of putting a negative, you put
yeah. You know, think of a positive number as being more from the left. So if it puts it here, if I say plus 100, it's going to put it 100 away from the left. And that pushed it towards the right. I could say right negative 100 and it would do the same thing. All right?
That's why you could say left because you're doing a negative.
Right, right. I almost always do negative. I almost always do left and top.
Okay.
You know, and if I want to put something up, I use a negative value for the top. If I want to put something down, I use a positive number from the top.
I kind of thought that's what you were doing, but
Yeah.
And now I realize why I couldn't do that block like I wanted to because I have to categorize it like you just did.
Would it be a CS code possibly, like to, I would say, because in C# you can create a text box for just to put in any kind of random string or text.
Mhm.
Would it be a CSS code for that? Or,
No, there's actually an HTML tag for that.
or really?
Yeah, there's an HTML tag for form controls. So, for example, text boxes, text areas, which are multiple line, drop downs, radio buttons, check boxes, buttons. Those are all part of HTML forms.
Oh, HTML, okay. So
Yeah.
that would go inside the actual HTML.
That would go inside the actual HTML document, right? Now you could change the way those looked
Yeah.
with CSS. Remember, like the content, you know, the meat of the stuff, the content is always in HTML. The way that it looks or the way that it's laid out is controlled by CSS.
I always wondered that because like some websites I come across, like you gotta like for like an online calculator, like I'm sure they didn't write the C# form code like from Visual Studio. I'm sure they didn't use.
Well, keep in mind that even if you create a web page, if you create a ASP.NET web page in Visual Studio, you use the ASP.NET controls, but they get translated into HTML. Okay, because that's all browsers understand is HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So browsers don't understand C#. So you can write, when you go into Visual Studio, you can create a form and specify an ASP text box, an ASP drop down, or whatever. But when the server processes that, it creates an HTML form on the other end. Because that's all browsers understand.
Okay, so then you wouldn't have to actually convert that language into the HTML itself. It just converts it by itself.
That's the web server's job,
Yeah.
is to take the code that's written in ASP.NET and translate it into a form that the browser can handle. That is to translate it into HTML.